The villain with a mother's heart. What she did for her son will surprise you. A story of resilience and hope that will touch your heart. Welcome back. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and enjoy the story. The luxurious ballroom of the Grand Riviera Hotel fell silent as Wera Novak entered. Elegant in her tailored midnight blue gown, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into a perfect chignon. She commanded attention without saying a word. For 20 years, she had been the ruthless CEO of Meridian Enterprises, destroying competitors, hand-climbing over anyone who stood in her way. Tonight, as she accepted her Businesswoman of the Year award, the carefully constructed facade began to crack when she spotted a young man at the back of the room, a face she never expected to see again. Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium, her acceptance speech forgotten. For the first time in decades, the most feared woman in the business world looked afraid. "Thank you for this honor," she managed, her voice uncharacteristically brittle. The crystal award felt heavy in her hands, a symbol of everything she had sacrificed to build her empire. Flashbulbs popped like miniature lightning storms, capturing her moment of vulnerability for tomorrow's business pages. The young man at the back stood motionless, his steady gaze causing Wera's heart to hammer against her ribs. Thomas. Her Thomas. But he wasn't looking at her with recognition, only curiosity, perhaps even disdain for what she represented in her tailored designer gown and diamond earrings that cost more than most people earned in a year. Wera forced herself to continue, drawing on decades of boardroom performances to mask her turmoil. "Meridian Enterprises has always prioritized innovation and growth," she recited mechanically, the rehearsed words tasting like ash on her tongue. "Our upcoming Porto Azul coastal resort will redefine luxury tourism while respecting the natural beauty that makes the region so special." A lie, of course. The Porto Azul project would devastate the protected coastline, but it would add millions to Meridian's bottom line. That had always been enough justification for Wera, until now, until she saw Thomas standing there, his expression hardening at the mention of the resort. After accepting the award, Wera navigated through the crowd of well-wishers and sycophants, her attention fixed on reaching him before he disappeared again. But by the time she broke free from the cluster of corporate admirers, Thomas was gone, leaving only the faint scent of sea air in his wake, so out of place in this perfumed gathering that Wera wondered if she had imagined him. Back in her penthouse suite, Wera kicked off her stilettos and poured herself a generous glass of whiskey. The city lights of Warsaw twinkled below her window, a constellation of human ambition that had guided her for so long. She unlocked a hidden safe behind an abstract painting and withdrew a worn manila envelope. Inside was a photograph of a small boy with serious eyes and a gap-toothed smile, school reports detailing exceptional intelligence, newspaper clippings of a young environmental activist. For 20 years, she had tracked Thomas's life from a distance, never interfering, but never completely letting go. 20 years ago, on a stormy night that seemed designed for life-altering decisions, she had found him, a tiny, abandoned 5-year-old, at the hospital construction site she was developing. The night she discovered him was the same night she had received the news that her own reproductive system had been irreparably damaged by an aggressive infection. Divine intervention, she had called it then. Criminal kidnapping, the law would call it now. She had used every resource at her disposal to forge adoption papers, create new identities, and relocate to the small coastal town of Gdynia. There, she had built a life for herself and Thomas, becoming Wera Novak, a widow starting fresh with her young son. For 10 years they had lived quietly, happily, until her business ambitions resurfaced and she gradually returned to the corporate world, eventually reclaiming her position at the top of Meridian under her new identity. By then, Thomas was a teenager with his own interests, primarily focused on environmental conservation, a passion that had grown into his career and now apparently had brought him back to Poland to oppose her latest project. The irony was almost too perfect to bear. Wera drained her glass and stared at the collection of Thomas's life that had continued without her. Tomorrow, she would find a way to accidentally encounter him in Gdynia. She needed to see what kind of man he had become. and if there was any, way to protect him from the truth of how he had come into her life. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing with contingency plans. If anyone discovered what she had done, she would lose everything: her company, her freedom, and most devastatingly, any chance of reconciliation with Thomas. But as dawn broke over the Warsaw skyline, Wera made her decision. She would return to Gdynia, to the scene of her greatest deception and her only true happiness. Whatever the cost, she would find a way to be part of Thomas's life again. The coastal air of Gdynia felt different from Warsaw's urban bustle, cleaner, sharper, carrying memories that pricked at Wera's carefully constructed armor. She had chosen a modest rental apartment overlooking the marina, far from the luxury she typically demanded but perfect for her current mission. From her balcony, she could see fishing boats bobbing gently in the harbor, their weathered hulls testament to the town's enduring maritime traditions. Wera had spent the morning reacquainting herself with the town that had once been their home. Much had changed in the 15 years since Thomas had left for university abroad. The charming bookshop where she used to buy him adventure stories had been replaced by a trendy cafe. The playground where he had conquered his fear of heights now featured modern equipment in bright primary colors. Some landmarks remained untouched: the lighthouse standing sentinel at the harbor entrance, the small church where she had sat in the back pew every Sunday, not out of faith, but to maintain their cover as an ordinary family. Wera wondered if Thomas retained any fond memories of this place, or if his return was purely professional, driven by his determination to protect the coastline from developers like her. Her research had revealed that Thomas now worked for a prestigious environmental consultancy and had recently returned to Poland to lead opposition against the Porto Azul resort project, her project. According to her sources, he frequented a local cafe near the Marine Research Center every morning. That's where Wera positioned herself, behind a newspaper at an outdoor table, her designer clothing exchanged for casual wear, her signature chignon replaced by a simpler style that softened her features. When Thomas appeared, Wera nearly gasped aloud. The years had transformed the lanky boy she remembered into a confident man. At 25, he moved with purpose, his father's height and her own determined set to his jaw evident even from a distance. He wore his dark hair slightly longer than was fashionable, and his clothing, jeans and a weathered leather jacket despite the spring chill, spoke of practicality rather than status. Wera watched him order coffee, chat easily with the barista, then settle at a table to review documents spread before him. Her plan had been to create a casual collision, a spilled drink perhaps, or a question about local attractions. But now that he was mere meters away, she found herself paralyzed. What right did she have to disrupt his life again? Before she could decide, fate intervened in the form of a sudden gust of wind that sent her napkin fluttering directly to Thomas's feet. He picked it up automatically, then looked up to find its owner. "I believe this is yours," he said in Polish, crossing to her table. Wera accepted the napkin with fingers that betrayed only the slightest tremor. "Thank you," she replied, searching his face for any flicker of recognition. There was none, just polite detachment and perhaps a hint of appraisal. She had changed her appearance significantly over the years, with subtle cosmetic procedures and a completely different style. The Wera who had raised him had worn simple clothes and minimal makeup, her hair often pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You're not local," he observed, surprising her with his continued attention. Wera offered the cover story she had prepared. "Just visiting. I'm researching potential property investments along the coast." His expression cooled immediately. "You might want to reconsider. Much of this coastline is environmentally sensitive and protected, or should be." "Oh? Are there development issues here?" She feigned ignorance, drawing him out. Thomas hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. For the next 30 minutes, Wera listened, as Thomas passionately explained the ecological importance of the Baltic coastline, the threat posed by luxury developments, and the specific concerns about the Porto Azul project. She asked pointed questions, playing devil's advocate as any potential investor would, all while drinking in every gesture, every expression that reminded her of the boy she had raised. "I apologize for the lecture," he finally said, checking his watch. "I tend to get carried away on this topic." "No apology necessary. It's refreshing to hear someone speak so passionately about something meaningful." The sincerity in her voice surprised even her. "Thomas Wisniewski," he said, extending his hand. "Wera Novak," she replied, using the name he would remember if anything triggered his childhood memories. A slight furrow appeared between his brows, the same expression he'd worn as a child. "When puzzling through a difficult math problem." "Have we met before? Your name seems familiar." Wera's heart stuttered, but she maintained her composure. "I don't believe so. I haven't visited Gdynia in many years." The moment passed and Thomas rose to leave. "Well, Ms. Novak, if you're serious about investment opportunities, consider ecotourism. It's sustainable and increasingly profitable." "I'll take that under advisement," she said, watching him gather his documents. "Perhaps we'll run into each other again." "Perhaps," he agreed, with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though, I should warn you, I'm quite determined to stop projects like Porto Azul. If that's the type of investment you're considering, we'll likely end up on opposite sides." If only he knew they already were. After Thomas left, Wera remained at the cafe, her coffee growing cold as she processed their interaction. He had grown into exactly the kind of man she had hoped he would, principled, intelligent, unafraid to stand for his convictions, and completely unaware of who she really was or what she had done to make him hers. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for Hayu. Continuing. Over the following days, Wera established a routine that allowed her to observe Thomas from a careful distance. She learned his habits: morning swims regardless of weather, work at the Environmental Coalition headquarters until late afternoon, then evenings often spent at community meetings or local pubs with colleagues. She discovered that he lived in a modest apartment near the harbor, that he preferred his coffee black, that he still carried a small notebook everywhere as he had as a child. What struck her most was his easy rapport with the townspeople. Fishermen greeted him by name, elderly women patted his arm affectionately, children ran up to show him interesting shells or stones they'd found. He had become part of this community, in a way Wera never had, despite her years living here. She had always remained slightly apart, guarded, focused on protecting their secret rather than building genuine connections. On her 5th day in Gdynia, Wera made her way to the small promontory overlooking the beach, where the Porto Azul resort was planned. Construction equipment already dotted the landscape, yellow monsters poised to transform the pristine coastline. As Meridian's CEO, she had reviewed the architectural renderings dozens of times. The sleek main building with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the sea, the infinity pool that would appear to merge with the Baltic horizon, the exclusive marina for guests' yachts. Standing there now, however, she saw the site through different eyes. The ancient pine trees that would be cleared, the delicate dune ecosystem that would be destroyed, the quiet beauty that would be replaced by manicured perfection. Was this truly the legacy she wanted to leave? "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. "At least for now." Wera turned to find Thomas standing a few meters away, his gaze fixed on the coastline. The late afternoon sun gilded his profile, highlighting the stubborn set of his jaw, her jaw, though he couldn't know that. "I was just admiring the view," she said carefully, "before it disappears under concrete and glass." His tone was more resigned than accusatory. "You mentioned you're fighting the development. Any success?" Thomas moved to stand beside her at the viewpoint railing. "Some. We've managed to delay the permits with environmental impact concerns, but Meridian has deep pockets and deeper influence. Their CEO is notorious for getting what she wants." Wera couldn't help herself. What she like this notorious CEO? Wera Kaczmarek, a corporate shark in designer clothing. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I've never met her personally, but her reputation speaks for itself. 20 years crushing competitors, exploiting loopholes in environmental regulations, putting profit above everything. The Porto Azul project is typical of her approach, Maximum luxury, minimum consideration for the local environment or community. Each word stung like a physical blow. Was that truly how the world saw her? How Thomas saw her? Vera struggled to keep her expression neutral. People like that usually have their reasons, she offered quietly. Thomas shot her a curious look. Defending the enemy, Ms. Novak. Just suggesting that few people are as one-dimensional as their public personas might suggest. Perhaps, he conceded. But actions speak louder than hypothetical depths of character, and Kaczmarek's actions have consistently shown a disregard for anything that doesn't serve her bottom line. The conversation shifted as a group of protesters arrived at the viewpoint, several greeting Thomas with obvious familiarity. Vera withdrew slightly, observing the dynamics. Most were young, idealistic types she would have dismissed as naive troublemakers from her executive suite. But among them was an elegant woman, perhaps a few years younger than Vera herself, who approached Thomas with particular warmth. "Thomas, we were looking for you," the woman said, kissing his cheek in greeting. "The legal team has some updates on the injunction." "Basia, perfect timing. This is Vera Novak, a visitor considering investments in the area. Ms. Novak, Barbara Lewandowska, our coalition's legal advisor and my mentor." Vera froze at the name, though her social smile never faltered. Barbara Lewandowska, formerly Barbara Jaworski, her most formidable business rival before Wera's disappearance and reinvention 20 years ago. The woman who had nearly exposed several of Meridian's questionable business practices and who had subsequently built her own impressive legal career specializing in environmental and corporate accountability cases. If anyone might recognize her, despite the changes in her appearance, it would be Barbara. "A pleasure," Vera said, extending her hand and modulating her voice slightly from her natural tone. Barbara's handshake was firm, her assessment shrewd. "Likewise. What brings you to our little controversy, Ms. Novak?" "Just curiosity. Thomas has been educating me on the ecological significance of the area." Barbara glanced between them with evident interest. "Has he now? Thomas is quite persuasive when he's passionate about a cause." "I've noticed," Vera replied dryly. Something in Barbara's expression shifted, a momentary puzzlement quickly masked. "You seem familiar, Ms. Novak. Have we crossed paths professionally?" "I don't believe so," Vera said smoothly. "I've spent most of my career outside Poland." Before Barbara could pursue the question, a young woman rushed up to their group, breathless with excitement. "They've halted construction for today. The permit review is causing delays." Cheers erupted from the assembled protesters. Thomas grinned broadly, the expression transforming his serious face into something so achingly familiar that Vera had to look away. It was the same smile he'd worn at 8 when he'd successfully built his first model sailboat, at 12 when he'd won the regional science competition. "Small victories," Thomas explained to Vera. "We'll take them where we can. Get them." "Congratulations," she said, meaning it despite the conflict of interest that tightened her chest. Every delay to the Porto Azul project cost Meridian money and threatened her position as CEO. Yet standing here, watching Thomas's genuine joy at this minor triumph, she couldn't bring herself to feel the outrage she should. As the group moved toward the beach for an impromptu celebration, Thomas surprised her with an invitation. "Would you like to join us? We're not all eco-warriors and legal eagles. Some of us just enjoy a good bonfire and better company." The prudent choice would be to decline, to minimize contact and reduce the risk of discovery. Instead, Vera heard herself accepting. The evening unfolded with unexpected warmth. Seated on driftwood around a small fire, listening to local musicians play traditional folk songs, Vera found herself relaxing incrementally. Thomas introduced her to a kaleidoscope of coalition members, marine biologists, local business owners, students, retirees, all united by their love for this stretch of coastline. "You see, it's not just about the environmental impact," Thomas explained, passing her a cup of hot mulled wine. "It's about preserving a way of life. The traditional fishing community here goes back generations. The annual Sea Goddess Festival alone brings more sustainable tourism than any luxury resort could without destroying what makes this place special." "The Sea Goddess Festival?" Vera asked. though she knew perfectly well what it was. She had taken Thomas to it every summer they had lived in Gdynia. It's amazing. Boats decorated with flowers and lights, traditional music, local food. Legend says the Baltic Sea is capricious, both giving and taking as it pleases. The festival honors the goddess of the sea to ensure good fishing and safe voyages. Barbara, who had been quietly observing their interaction, joined the conversation. Thomas has always been particularly attached to the festival. It must have made quite an impression on him as a child. My mother used to take me, Thomas said, a shadow crossing his face. Before I left Gdynia. Wera's hand tightened around her cup. This was dangerous territory. You lived here as a child, she asked, striving for casual interest. Until I was 15, he confirmed. Then I went to boarding school in England. My mother thought it would provide better opportunities. The simplified explanation contained no hint of the painful argument that had preceded his departure. The tears and recriminations as teenage Thomas had accused her of caring more about her resurrected corporate ambitions than their life in Gdynia. He had been right, of course. After years of living quietly, she had grown restless, hungry for the power and validation she had once commanded. She had convinced herself that an international education would benefit Thomas, that the distance was necessary to protect their secret as she reclaimed her business persona. She must miss you, Wera ventured, unable to help herself. Thomas's expression closed off. We're not in contact. It's complicated. Barbara placed a comforting hand on his arm. Family usually is, she said with surprising gentleness. Then turning to Wera with more intensity. Don't you find, Miss Novak? The question felt loaded, as though Barbara was probing for something beyond the superficial exchange. Wera maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. In my experience, yes, particularly when careers and personal choices pull in opposite directions. As the evening progressed, Wera became increasingly certain that Barbara harbored suspicions about her identity. The lawyer watched her with subtle but persistent attention, particularly when she interacted with Thomas. By the time the gathering dispersed, Wera had determined that her safest course would be to minimize contact with Barbara while continuing to cultivate her reconnection with Thomas. Walking back toward the town center, Wera found herself alone with Thomas as the others gradually peeled off toward their respective homes. You're an unusual investor, Miss Novak, he observed, hands thrust into his jacket pockets against the evening chill. Most don't spend their evenings with environmental activists. I find diverse perspectives valuable, she replied, and please, call me Wera. He nodded, seeming to weigh something in his mind before speaking again. My mother's name was Wera. The simple statement nearly stopped her heart. Common name in Poland, she managed. Not that common. He studied her face in the moonlight. There's something about you that seems... I can't quite place it. Have you ever lived in Gdynia before? Briefly, many years ago, she admitted, calculating how much truth was safe. People change, places too. They had reached the harbor where their paths would diverge, her rental apartment to the east, his to the north. Thomas hesitated, then asked, Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to show you something that might influence your investment thinking. Caution urged Wera to create distance, but 20 years of missed opportunities weighed heavier. I'd like that, she said. As she watched him walk away, Wera faced the stark reality of her situation. She had come to Gdynia to glimpse the man her son had become, perhaps to orchestrate some minor role in his life from the shadows. Instead, she found herself drawn into direct contact, risking everything for the chance to know him again. Back in her rented apartment, Wera called her assistant in Warsaw. I need comprehensive background research on Barbara Lewandowska, she instructed, and I want you to begin preparing delay strategies for the Porto Azul project, environmental assessments, community impact studies, archaeological surveys, anything that might legitimately slow construction without appearing as corporate sabotage. Ms. Kaczmarek, may I ask why? The board is already concerned about the project timeline. You may not ask why, Wera replied, her voice dropping to the glacial tone that had made grown men tremble in boardrooms across Europe. Just make it happen. After ending the call, She stood at her window overlooking the harbor, watching the navigation lights of fishing boats returning from late excursions. For 20 years, she had built her business empire with single-minded determination, each decision calculated for maximum corporate advantage. Now, for the first time since finding a frightened 5-year-old boy at a construction site, her priorities were shifting, realigning around something more precious than power or profit. Whatever came next, she knew with absolute certainty that she would protect Thomas, even if it meant dismantling everything else she had built. Morning arrived with a text message from Thomas, suggesting they meet at the harbor at 10. Wera, dressed carefully in practical clothing, suitable for whatever excursion he had planned, applying minimal makeup and securing her hair in a simple ponytail. Looking in the mirror, she saw flashes of the woman she had been during their years in Gdynia, less polished, more authentic. Thomas waited by a weathered wooden pier, deep in conversation with an elderly fisherman whose gnarled hands gestured expressively as he spoke. When he spotted Wera approaching, Thomas waved her over with an easy smile that made her heart constrict with remembered joy. "Perfect timing," he greeted her. "This is Henrik, third-generation fisherman and walking encyclopedia of local marine knowledge." The old man squinted at Wera, his face a topographical map of sun and sea exposure. "You're the investor, lady," Thomas mentioned. "Come to see if our little piece of heaven is worth your zloty." "Something like that," Wera replied, earning a grunt that might have indicated approval or skepticism. "Henrik has agreed to take us out so you can see the coastline." "From the water," Thomas explained. "It offers a different perspective on what's at stake with the Porto Azul development." The small fishing boat pitched gently beneath Wera's feet as they pulled away from the harbor. She hadn't been on the Baltic in nearly 15 years, not since those precious summers when Thomas was young, and they would rent a sailboat for afternoon excursions. He had been a natural on the water, fearless yet respectful of its power. Watching him now confidently helping Henrik with the rigging, she allowed herself a moment of maternal pride that she had no right to claim. As they followed the coastline, North, Thomas and Henrik pointed out features that would be affected by the development. Breeding grounds for protected seabirds, underwater kelp forests that served as marine nurseries, ancient geological formations that told the area's natural history. "The resort plans include dredging for the marina," Thomas explained, indicating a bay of startling blue-green clarity. "It would destroy this entire ecosystem and alter current patterns that many local species depend on." Wera absorbed the information in silence, mentally comparing it with the environmental assessments Meridian had commissioned, assessments that had conveniently minimized these concerns. Had she deliberately ignored such data, or had her team sanitized reports to tell her what they knew she wanted to hear? Henrik steered them closer to a section of dramatic cliffs where construction equipment perched like predatory birds. "This is where they plan the main structure," Thomas said, his expression darkening. "The geological surveys commissioned by local authorities suggest these cliffs are less stable than Meridian's reports claim." "That seems like something that would concern the developers themselves," Wera observed. "Unstable foundations aren't good for luxury resorts." "You'd think so," Thomas agreed. "But our coalition accessed some internal communications suggesting they're aware of the risk, but planning workarounds that prioritize the sea views over structural integrity. Classic Kaczmarek approach: maximum profit, minimum safety margin." The casual indictment from her son's lips felt like a physical blow. Was this truly how her company operated under her leadership? Had her focus on the bottom line corrupted every level of decision-making? Their journey continued around a peninsula to a small, sheltered cove inaccessible by land. Henrik dropped anchor, and Thomas produced a simple picnic from his backpack: local bread, smoked fish, and early spring berries. "This is my favorite spot along the entire coastline," Thomas confessed as they ate, perched on the boat's weathered planks. "It's part of the protected marine sanctuary, though the Porto Azul developers have been lobbying to redraw the boundaries." Wera studied the pristine cove with its crystal waters and untouched shoreline. It was beautiful in a wild, unmanicured way that no resort landscaping could replicate. "I can see why you treasure it," she said honestly. Henrik, who had been quietly smoking his pipe, joined the conversation. "You know the legend of this cove, boy? Tell your lady friend." Thomas rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Henrik believes this is where the sea goddess comes ashore during the festival. According to local superstition, if you leave an offering, here on Midsummer's Eve she grants your heart's desire, but always with a price." "Not superstition," Henrik corrected firmly. "History. My grandfather saw her himself as a young man, asked for a bountiful catch to feed his village during a lean year, got it too, but lost his youngest brother to the sea that same season. The goddess always balances her gifts with sacrifice. The sea gives and the sea takes," Thomas translated the local saying, his expression suggesting he found the folklore charming rather than credible. But Wera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Baltic breeze. Hadn't she experienced exactly that balance? Given a child when she could have none of her own, only to lose him to her ambition a decade later. Perhaps there was wisdom in the old tales after all. On their return journey, Thomas received an urgent call that he took at the bow, his expression growing increasingly animated as he spoke. When he rejoined them, his eyes were bright with excitement. "That was our legal team. We've just been granted an emergency hearing on our petition to suspend the Porto Azul permits, pending further environmental review. The regional court accepted our evidence of potential endangered species impact." Henrik clapped him on the shoulder, nearly toppling them both in the rocking boat. "The goddess favors your fight, boy," Thomas laughed, but his joy was genuine. "More likely Barbara's legal brilliance, but I'll take whatever cosmic help we can get." Wera offered congratulations while mentally calculating the financial impact on Meridian. The delays would be costly, potentially jeopardizing relationships with investors who had already committed to the project. If she was still fully committed to the development, she would be activating political connections and legal countermeasures already. Instead, she found herself strangely unmoved by the threat to her company's plans. After docking, Thomas invited Wera to join a strategy meeting at Coalition headquarters, his earlier reserve replaced by collaborative enthusiasm. "You've seen what we're fighting for now. Perhaps you'd like to see how we're fighting?" The Coalition operated from a converted warehouse near the harbor, its interior a hive of activity. Volunteers staffed phone banks, environmental scientists huddled over maps, university students designed promotional materials. At the center of it all stood Barbara Lewandowska, directing operations with the same commanding presence Wera recognized. From their past corporate battles, Barbara's eyebrows rose fractionally when Thomas introduced Wera as their guest. "Ms. Novak has decided to observe our humble operation," she said, her tone making it clear she found Wera's presence suspicious. "How enlightening for her." "Wera's been quite supportive," Thomas defended, oblivious to the tension between the women. "She has valuable business perspective on development projects." "I'm sure she does," Barbara replied dryly. "Thomas, the legal team needs your input on the wetlands documentation. Would you mind?" As Thomas moved away, Barbara stepped closer to Wera, lowering her voice. "I don't know what your game is, but Thomas has suffered enough disappointment in his life. If you're gathering intelligence for Meridian or any other developer, know that I will personally ensure you regret it." The protective fierceness in Barbara's voice gave Wera pause. Clearly, the relationship between Thomas and Barbara went beyond professional mentorship. "I assure you, my interest is personal rather than corporate," she replied carefully. "That's what concerns me," Barbara countered. "I've been watching you with him. There's something familiar in your interaction." Before Wera could respond, commotion erupted at the entrance as a group of Coalition members arrived with breaking news. The public regional planning meeting scheduled for the following week would now include a direct presentation from Meridian Enterprises, specifically from CEO Wera Kaczmarek herself. "She never shows up for these local meetings," someone exclaimed. "Why now?" "Sources say she's taking personal control of the Porto Azul situation after the permit delays," another volunteer reported. Thomas rejoined the group, his expression determined. "This is actually good news. Better to face Kaczmarek directly than deal with her corporate minions. At least we'll know exactly what we're up against." Wera stood frozen in the midst of the activity, mind racing. She had authorized no such appearance. Someone at Meridian was making decisions without her approval, likely responding to her uncharacteristic absence and recent instructions to create delays. Her careful plans were unraveling faster than she had anticipated. "Are you all right, Wera? You've gone quite pale," Thomas asked, his concern evident. "Just a headache," she managed. "I should probably head back to my apartment." "I'll walk." "You?" he offered immediately. "That's not necessary. I insist. The meeting can proceed without me for a few minutes." As they walked through the late afternoon shadows, stretching across the harbor, Wera struggled to formulate a plan. She needed to contact her executive team immediately to rescind whatever authorization had been given for her appearance at the planning meeting. But doing so would only increase suspicions about her absence and potentially accelerate the internal power struggle she sensed was developing at Meridian. "Sorry about Barbara," Thomas said, breaking into her thoughts. "She's protective. My mother's disappearance hit me hard, and Barbara's been something of a surrogate since I returned to Poland. Wera nearly missed a step. Your mother disappeared." Thomas's expression tightened. "She didn't die, if that's what you're thinking. After sending me to boarding school, she essentially vanished from my life. Occasional financial support, but no visits, no meaningful communication. By the time I finished university, the money stopped too. I tried to find her, but it seemed she'd built a new life that didn't include me." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Wera felt sick with the realization of how her actions had appeared to him. She had maintained distance to protect him from the truth of his adoption, to prevent anyone from discovering her deception and taking him away. Instead, he had experienced it as abandonment. "I'm sorry," she said inadequately. "Perhaps she thought she was doing what was best for you." "By disappearing?" The bitterness in his laugh cut through her. "What kind of mother thinks vanishing from her child's life is best for them? The kind who fears that the truth would hurt more than the absence, she thought but couldn't say. The kind who built her entire identity around protecting a secret that, once revealed, would destroy everything, including her son's trust." They reached her apartment building in tense silence, Thomas still bristling with the residue of old pain she had unwittingly triggered. "Thank you for today," Wera said quietly, "for showing me what's truly at stake." His expression softened slightly. "Did it make any difference to your investment plans, I mean?" "More than you know," Wera replied truthfully. "Some perspectives can't be unlearned once they're seen." As she watched him walk away, Wera knew her time was running dangerously short. The announced appearance of CEO Wera Kaczmarek at next week's planning meeting had accelerated her timeline dramatically. She had days, not weeks, to decide which identity would survive this inevitable collision: the powerful corporate leader, or the mother who had sacrificed everything once for a child she couldn't bear to lose. From her window, she could see the Porto Azul construction site in the distance, yellow machines dormant for the day but poised to transform the landscape. Tomorrow those machines would remain silent, not due to legal challenges but because she would make it so. For the first time in 20 years, Wera Kaczmarek would use her corporate power not to build her empire, but to protect something far more precious. Will Wera be able to maintain her double identity much longer? What will happen when the truth inevitably comes to light? And who might have orchestrated this sudden call for her appearance at the planning meeting? Continue watching to find out as Wera's carefully constructed world begins to unravel. Dawn found Wera already awake, seated at her laptop orchestrating the first phase of her improvised plan. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she issued a series of directives to her executive team, each carefully crafted to appear as standard corporate strategy rather than sabotage of her own project. Due to emerging environmental concerns and potential reputational risk, I'm ordering a comprehensive reassessment of the Porto Azul site, she wrote to her chief operating officer. All construction activities are to be suspended, pending new geological surveys and marine impact studies. This is non-negotiable. She then composed a terse message to her communications director. I will not be attending the regional planning meeting. Prepare a statement citing urgent international business commitments. Deputy Director Nowak will represent Meridian's interests. Nowak was competent but lacked the ruthless efficiency that had made Wera's presentations so effective. He would follow the approved talking points without the intimidating presence that had steamrolled local opposition in previous projects. It would buy time, precious time she desperately needed. Her third action was the riskiest. She accessed Meridian's secure server and began reviewing all files related to Thomas's environmental coalition. What she found confirmed her growing suspicions. Her chief strategy officer, Marek Kowalski, had been conducting opposition research that went far beyond professional due diligence. There were surveillance photos of coalition meetings, detailed personal profiles of key members, and most disturbingly, a file on Thomas that included speculation about his connection to Barbara Jaworski's missing persons case from 20-plus years. Gago. Wera's blood ran cold. Marek had always been ambitious, but this level of investigation suggested he was pursuing an agenda beyond Meridian's business interests. Whether he suspected her true identity or was simply gathering leverage against all potential opponents, he had come dangerously close to unraveling the secret she had protected for 2 decades. After securing copies of the most incriminating files, Wera initiated an internal security protocol that would temporarily restrict access to sensitive project documentation, ostensibly for encryption upgrades. It wouldn't stop Marek for long, but it would limit his ability to gather additional information while she formulated her next move. By mid-morning, her phone was vibrating constantly with increasingly urgent messages from her executive team. The sudden construction halt had triggered panic at Meridian headquarters. She responded selectively, maintaining enough control to prevent outright rebellion while allowing her carefully constructed delays to take effect. As she was preparing to meet Thomas for lunch, another accidental encounter she had arranged, her phone rang with Marek's direct number. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "This is unexpected, Marek," she said coolly. "I left specific instructions about not being disturbed." "Circumstances warranted the intrusion," he replied, his normally deferential tone notably absent. "The board is calling an emergency session regarding Porto Azul. Your presence is requested. Required, actually." "The board answers to me, not the reverse," Wera reminded him sharply. "Ordinarily, yes, but when the CEO issues contradictory directives, disappears to a location she refuses to disclose, and initiates actions that directly threaten the company's financial interests, governance protocols allow for intervention." The implication was clear. Marek was making a power play, using her unusual behavior to position himself with the board. Wera had expected resistance, but not an outright coup attempt so quickly. "I'll conference in," she conceded, knowing that refusing would only strengthen his position. "The board insists on your physical presence. The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. in Warsaw." His satisfaction was audible. "Unless there's some compelling reason you can't tear yourself away from Gdynia." The deliberate mention of her location confirmed her worst fears. Marek knew exactly where she was and likely why. She maintained her composure with effort. "I'll be there," she said, and ended the call before he could respond. The carefully structured timeline she had envisioned was collapsing around her. She had hoped to build a relationship with Thomas, gradually perhaps even find a way to reveal the truth on her own terms. Now she would be forced to leave Gdynia within hours to defend her position at Meridian while somehow preserving the fragile reconnection she had begun with her son. Thomas was waiting at the harborside cafe, his expression brightening when he spotted her. Wera steeled herself against the joy his simple recognition kindled. This meeting would need to serve multiple purposes now, maintaining their newfound connection while preparing for the separation her Warsaw summons necessitated. "I've been reading about your Porto Azul protests online," she said after they had ordered. "Quite impressive organization for a grassroots movement." Thomas accepted the compliment with a nod. "We've been fortunate to have Barbara's legal expertise and connections, and the cause itself attracts passionate supporters. Including yourself, you seem particularly invested, even beyond professional environmental concerns." He hesitated, running a finger along the rim of his water glass. "This coastline represents something personal to me. My childhood memories, I suppose, before everything changed. The opening was perfect, if painful." "You mentioned your mother sending you away. May I ask what happened?" Thomas's expression shuttered momentarily, then relaxed as he seemed to make a decision. It's not a story I share often, but there's something about you. Maybe because you remind me of her in some ways. Wera forced herself to breathe normally, to show only appropriate interest, rather than the desperate hunger for connection that clawed at her throat. She was brilliant, Thomas continued. Successful in business, though she kept the details vague. We lived simply in Gdynia, just the two of us. She had been widowed before I was born. At least that's what she told me. Looking back, I wonder how much of our life was real and how much was carefully constructed fiction. What makes you say that? Wera asked, her mouth dry. After I was sent to boarding school, I tried to maintain contact. Her responses grew increasingly infrequent and formal. By my second year, she had relocated without providing a forwarding address, just a post office box. When I graduated university, I hired a private investigator. Wera's heart stuttered. This was new information, a variable she hadn't accounted for. He found nothing concrete, but plenty of inconsistencies. No birth certificate for me naming her as my mother. No marriage records for the father she claimed had died. Even her employment history before Gdynia was suspiciously blank. It was as if Wera Novak had simply materialized in this town with a 5-year-old child. The cafe suddenly felt airless. What conclusion did you draw? She managed. That she had her reasons for the deception, whatever they were. Thomas's expression was complex, hurt overlaid with reluctant understanding. I still hope to find her someday to ask her why, not for recrimination but for closure, I suppose. Wera fought back the tears that threatened to betray her. All these years, she had convinced herself that her absence protected him. Instead, she had left him with questions that haunted his adult life, wounds that remained unhealed. I have to return to Warsaw unexpectedly, she said, the words feeling inadequate against the magnitude of what remained unspoken between them. Business emergency. But I'd like to continue our conversations when I return. Disappointment flickered across his features. When will that be? I'm not certain. A few days, perhaps longer. She hesitated, then took a risk. Would you mind if I contacted you? Perhaps we could continue discussing your coalition's work. The smile that transformed. His serious expression made her want to confess everything immediately. Consequences be damned. I'd like that, he said, retrieving his phone. Your number. They exchanged contact information, the mundane action carrying weight far beyond its apparent simplicity. For the first time in 15 years, Wera would have a direct connection. To her son, small comfort against the storm she knew awaited her in Warsaw. As they parted, Thomas surprised her with a gentle touch on her arm. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For listening. For caring about this place. He gestured toward the coastline. Most investors only see potential profit margins. Some things are worth more than money, she replied, the truth of it settling into her bones with newfound certainty. Hours later, as her private car sped toward Warsaw, Wera reviewed the dossier her assistant had compiled on Barbara Lewandowska. The parallels with her own life were striking. Both women had risen to prominence through intelligence and determination. Both had sacrificed personal relationships for professional success. But where Wera had chosen deception and isolation to protect her secret, Barbara had built a reputation for transparent integrity and community connection. Most significantly, Barbara had been investigating a missing persons case 20 years ago, around the same time Wera had disappeared with Thomas. The file didn't specify details, but Wera's instincts screamed warning. Barbara's protective attitude toward Thomas, her persistent suspicion of Wera Novak, and her specialization in corporate accountability cases all suggested a connection too close for coincidence. As Warsaw's skyline appeared on the horizon, Wera made two decisions that would irreversibly alter the carefully separated worlds she had maintained for 20 years. First, she would fight to retain control of Meridian only long enough to permanently protect the Gdynia coastline from development. Second, she would find a way to tell Thomas the truth herself, before Marek or Barbara could use it as a weapon, against either of them. The cost would be enormous. Her company, her reputation, possibly even her freedom if the illegal adoption was pursued in criminal court. But for the first time since she had found a frightened child at a construction site and made him her own, Vera Kaczmarek was choosing love over power, truth over control. The realization brought neither peace nor certainty, only grim determination, and the faint hope that somewhere beneath the pain of abandonment, Thomas might still harbor enough affection for the mother he had known to forgive the woman she had become. The Meridian Enterprises boardroom maintained the austere elegance Vera had insisted upon when renovating the company headquarters 5 years earlier. Polished mahogany gleamed beneath subtle lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows framed Warsaw's financial district, and precisely spaced leather chairs surrounded the massive table where the future of her company would now be decided. Vera had arrived, early, deliberately choosing to stand rather than take her customary seat at the head of the table. The power dynamics of the coming confrontation would be delicate. Appearing too defensive or too aggressive could equally undermine her position. Board members filtered in gradually, their greetings ranging from warmly concerned to coolly professional. Vera noted the alignments with practiced eye, 3 solidly loyal to her leadership, 4 clearly leaning toward Marek's faction, and 5 undecided. Not optimal, but workable if she played this perfectly. Marek entered last, the subtle confidence in his bearing confirming her suspicions. He had been laying groundwork for this challenge carefully, waiting for her to provide the opportunity. His ambition required. "Vera," he acknowledged with practiced deference that failed to mask his anticipation, "we've been concerned about your sudden sabbatical." 5 days is hardly a sabbatical, Marek," she replied evenly, "and my continued direction of company operations hardly constitutes an absence." The chairman called the meeting to order before Marek could respond. "We're here to discuss recent developments regarding the Porto Azul project. CEO Kaczmarek has issued directives that appear to contradict previously approved plans. Chief Strategy Officer Kowalski has raised concerns about potential impact on shareholder value." Vera allowed Marek to present his case first, listening impassively as he outlined the financial implications of her construction halt, the confusion created by her conflicting directives, and the reputational risk of appearing to capitulate to environmental activists. His presentation was thorough and persuasive, exactly what she would have expected from the executive she had personally mentored. "Additionally," Marek continued, displaying a series of photographs on the boardroom screen, "we have reason to believe that Ms. Kaczmarek's judgment may be compromised by personal factors." The images showed Vera with Thomas at various locations around Dinja, the cafe, the harbour, on Henrik's boat. The final photograph captured their parting handshake outside her rental apartment, the familiar gesture appearing intimate from the photographer's angle. "This man is Thomas Wiśniewski, the environmental engineer leading opposition to our Porto Azul development," Marek explained unnecessarily. "Our CEO has been meeting with him regularly, while issuing directives that directly support his coalition's agenda." Murmurs rippled through the board members. Vera maintained her composed expression through years of boardroom discipline, though internally she seethed at this invasion of her privacy. She had expected Marek to challenge her business decisions, not to weaponize her personal life. "If I may respond," she said when Marek concluded, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. She moved to the head of the table now, reclaiming the physical position of leadership. "First, let me address the alleged contradictions in my directives." For the next 20 minutes, Vera presented a masterful reframing of her recent decisions. The construction halt became a strategic pause to address legitimate geological concerns that, if ignored, could create catastrophic liability. The additional environmental assessments were positioned as prudent risk management rather than capitulation to activism. Each potentially damaging decision was meticulously reconstructed as sound business strategy for long-term corporate benefit. "As for my presence in Gdynia," she continued smoothly, "I believe in first-hand assessment of significant investments. The Porto Azul represents nearly 18% of our current development portfolio. Understanding local conditions and concerns is basic due diligence, not compromise." She paused, allowing her gaze to move deliberately around the table. "My meetings with Mr. Wiśniewski have been informative. Sometimes, gentlemen, one learns more from adversaries than from sycophants." The subtle jab at Marek landed precisely as intended. Several board members nodded in agreement, their estimation of her tactical acumen visibly rising. However, she continued, shifting tone slightly, these discussions have illuminated legitimate issues with our current development plan. I propose a modified approach that would preserve the economic viability of the investment while addressing the environmental concerns that have generated such significant opposition. Wera presented a rapidly formulated alternative, a scaled-back resort focusing on ecotourism rather than luxury excess, preserving the most sensitive coastal areas while developing only the sections with minimal environmental impact. The projected profits would be lower but still substantial, and the reputational benefits of positioning Meridian as environmentally progressive would offset financial concessions. This isn't surrender, she concluded. It's adaptation. The business landscape is shifting beneath us. Environmental considerations are increasingly central to regulatory approval, investor confidence, and consumer choice. Meridian can lead this transition or be dragged reluctantly along. I recommend the former. As she retook her seat, Wera could see the calculations happening behind each board member's expression. She had given them a plausible business justification for actions that had been driven by entirely personal motivations. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Marek recovered quickly, countering with shareholder expectations and contractual obligations to luxury brand partners already committed to the original Porto Azul concept. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, technical and financial details obscuring the fundamental power struggle underway. When the chairman finally called for a vote on whether to proceed with Wera's modified plan or override her directives and continue with the original development, the room fell silent with anticipation. "Before we vote," Wera said quietly, "I'd like to add one final consideration." All eyes turned to her, Marek's narrowing with suspicion. "During my review of project materials, I discovered concerning irregularities in the original environmental impact assessments." She distributed folders containing the evidence she had gathered. These documents suggest that Meridian representatives may have influenced testing methodologies to minimize reported contamination levels and species impact. The board members flipped through the paperwork with increasing alarm. What Wera had discovered was more than procedural corner-cutting. It bordered on criminal environmental fraud. If construction proceeds according to the original plan, and these irregularities become public, as they inevitably would during the heightened scrutiny we now face, Meridian could face significant legal liability beyond mere project delays. The implication was clear. Wera wasn't just offering a compromise, she was providing the board with a path to avoid potential scandal. Her gaze met Marek's across the table, the unspoken message passing between them. She knew who had authorized the fraudulent assessments, and she was prepared to use that knowledge if pushed. The vote was 8-4 in favor of Wera's modified plan, with Marek and his closest allies in the minority. She had maintained control, but the margin revealed how precarious her position had become. This victory was temporary at best. As the board members dispersed, Marek lingered. When they were alone in the boardroom, he abandoned all pretense of deference. "Impressive maneuvering," he acknowledged coldly. "But we both know this isn't about environmental concerns or corporate strategy. It's about the boy." Wera neither confirmed nor denied the accusation. "The approved plan is sound business. Implement it without deviation." "Do you really think you can protect him from the truth?" Marek pressed, his tone almost pitying. "Or is it yourself you're trying to protect? I wonder which would devastate him more. Learning his mother has been alive and well all these years, or discovering that the woman who raised him stole him from his real family." The accusation landed like a physical blow, but Wera's expression revealed nothing. "You overstep, Marek. Speculation about my personal life has no place in this company." "Your personal life becomes company business when it threatens Meridian's viability," he countered. "The board may have accepted your alternative plan today, but when they learn the full extent of your deception, both corporate and personal, their confidence will evaporate." "Is that a threat? Call it a prophecy." He gathered his papers unhurriedly. "You've won this skirmish, Wera, but you've revealed your vulnerability. I wonder what Thomas Wisniewski would say if someone shared those surveillance photos with him, if someone told him exactly who has been manipulating him over coffee. With that parting shot, Marek left her alone in the boardroom. The victory she had engineered already turning to ash. He was right about one thing. She had revealed her vulnerability. After 20 years of ruthless invulnerability, she had allowed a single weakness to become visible. In the corporate predator pool she had dominated for so long, that was an invitation to attack. Back in her executive suite, Wera instructed her assistant to cancel all appointments for the remainder of the day. Alone, she turned to the wall of windows overlooking Warsaw, the city where she had rebuilt her empire after leaving Gdynia. The skyline sparkled with approaching dusk, indifferent to the personal crisis unfolding in the penthouse office above it. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message from Thomas. Heard construction at Porto Azul has stopped temporarily. Any insights from your investment research? The simple text represented everything at stake. His trust, tentatively extended. Her deception, precariously maintained. The possibility of reconciliation, hanging by the thinnest thread. Wera composed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, development plans appear to be evolving toward more sustainable model. Still gathering information. Hope to update you in person soon. The reply came almost immediately. Looking forward to it. Environmental Coalition celebrating small victory tonight at Marina Pub if you're back in Gdynia. She wouldn't be, of course. The board situation required her presence in Warsaw indefinitely. But the invitation itself was precious, evidence that their connection was developing beyond their chance encounters. Her executive phone chimed with an urgent message from her assistant. Dr. Adamski called from Gdynia Regional Hospital. Says it's urgent regarding TW. Wera froze, her mind immediately constructing worst-case scenarios. Had Thomas been injured? Was this somehow Marek's retribution, moved faster than she had anticipated? With shaking fingers, she dialed the doctor's number. Dr. Adamski, this is Wera Kaczmarek, returning your call about Thomas Wisniewski. Ms. Kaczmarek, thank you for responding so quickly. The doctor's voice was professionally calm, but carried an undertone of concern. Mr. Wisniewski was brought in after collapsing during a community meeting. Initial tests indicate an unusual blood chemistry pattern that requires further investigation. Is he? How serious is it? Wera struggled to maintain her composure. Stable for now, we've scheduled additional testing. However, when admitting him, we discovered something concerning in his medical history, or rather the lack thereof. There appear to be no records before age 5, which complicates our diagnostic approach since many conditions have genetic components. The walls of Wera's carefully constructed separate lives were crumbling faster than she could reinforce them. I understand. What do you need from me? Nothing at this stage, Miss Kaczmarek. Mr. Wisniewski provided your contact information as his emergency contact, which I found interesting given your professional differences regarding the Porto Azul development. So Thomas had listed her, or rather the Meridian CEO, as his emergency contact. A strategic choice, perhaps, keeping his opponent informed of his condition. Or had he somehow sensed their connection despite her disguise? Our differences are professional, not personal, Wera responded carefully. Please keep me updated on his condition. I'll arrange to return to Gdynia immediately. After ending the call, Wera sat motionless, the competing crises demanding simultaneous resolution. Thomas was ill, possibly seriously. Marek was mobilizing against her, threatening to expose her most closely guarded secret. The board's confidence in her leadership hung by a thread, and beneath it all, the weight of 20 years of deception threatened to suffocate her with its accumulated mass. For the first time in decades, Wera Kaczmarek felt the unfamiliar sting of tears. She had built an empire through calculating control, anticipating and countering threats before they materialized. Now events were accelerating beyond her ability to manage them, cascading toward a resolution she could no longer shape. With sudden clarity, Wera realized that her carefully maintained control had always been an illusion. Like the sea goddess of Gdynia folklore, fate gave and took according to its own mysterious balance, indifferent to human schemes and ambitions. Her decision crystallized with unexpected simplicity. She would return to Gdynia immediately, not as the corporate titan defending her business interests, but as a mother facing the truth she had evaded for 20 years. Whatever the cost to her career, her reputation, or her freedom, Thomas's well-being now superseded all other considerations. As Wera packed an overnight bag, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Barbara Lewandowska. The timing could not be coincidence. With resignation settling over her like an unfamiliar cloak, Wera answered. "I believe it's time we discussed—" "Thomas," Barbara said without preamble, "and the truth about who you really are, Wera Kaczmarek. As you sit at the edge of your seat, wondering what Barbara knows and how Thomas will respond when the truth is finally revealed, remember that the most profound transformations often come in our moments of greatest vulnerability." Will Thomas. Forgive the mother who has hidden from him all these years. What secret is Barbara keeping that could change everything? And is Thomas's mysterious illness connected to the past Wera has tried so desperately to conceal? The answers await in the next chapter of our unfolding drama. The small private room in Gdynia Regional Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of modern medical care. Monitors tracked vital signs, fluorescent lights cast their unforgiving glow, and the antiseptic air carried the underlying human drama of thousands of private battles waged within these institutional walls. Thomas lay, sleeping, his complexion paler than normal but his breathing steady. Wera stood motionless in the doorway, absorbing the sight of her son in a hospital bed, vulnerable in a way that tore at her carefully maintained composure. For all her wealth and power, she could not shield him from this unnamed threat. "He's stable," Barbara said quietly from behind her. "The doctors are running tests to determine what caused the collapse." Wera turned to face the woman who had summoned her back to Gdynia with that cryptic phone call. Barbara looked exhausted, her usual elegant appearance slightly disheveled after hours at the hospital. "Thank you for staying with him," Wera said, genuine gratitude in her voice despite the tension between them. Barbara's expression remained guarded. "We should talk elsewhere. He needs rest." They found a small consultation room at the end of the hall, its uncomfortable chairs and utilitarian table designed for delivering medical news rather than facilitating personal revelations. Once the door closed behind them, the pretense fell away from both women. "How long have you known?" Wera asked directly. "Suspected for years. Confirmed when you appeared in Gdynia calling yourself Wera Novak." Barbara's gaze was unwavering. "You disappeared 20 years ago, shortly after our last legal confrontation. Meridian Enterprises faltered briefly, then restructured under new leadership that was remarkably similar to yours in business approach. A few years later, Wera Kaczmarek emerged as CEO, with a conveniently reconstructed biography and a surgically altered appearance. And yet you never exposed me. I had no proof, only suspicions, and by then I was more concerned with another mystery." Barbara paused, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "A missing child case that haunted me for 2 decades. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with accumulated secrets and unspoken accusations." "I don't know what you mean," Wera said automatically, the defensive lie reflexive after so many years. Barbara's laugh held no humor. "Please, we're beyond such denials now. I know you took Thomas from that hospital construction site. What I don't know is why, or whether you realize whose child you actually stole." The strange phrasing caught Wera off guard. He was abandoned. There was no identification. No one came looking. "Someone came looking," Barbara interrupted fiercely. "His mother returned less than an hour after you took him, frantic to find her son gone. She had only left him briefly while seeking help for a minor injury. By the time she returned with medical assistance, both you and the child had vanished." The revelation staggered Wera. For 20 years she had justified her actions with the belief that Thomas had been truly abandoned, in need of the love and security she could provide. The possibility that she had taken him from a mother who wanted him, who had been searching for him all these years, shattered that carefully maintained rationalization. "How do you know this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because I was there that night," Barbara replied, her composure finally breaking. "Because Thomas is my sister's child." The world tilted beneath Wera as the implications cascaded through her understanding. Barbara wasn't merely Thomas's mentor or a corporate adversary. She was his family, his real family. "Your sister?" Wera repeated numbly. "Katarzyna Jaworski. She was working as a site inspector at that hospital construction. She had brought Thomas with her during a weekend inspection because her childcare had fallen through. He was playing in what she thought was a secure area, while she documented some safety violations. When she cut her hand on exposed rebar and went to find the first aid kit, she left him for what was supposed to be 5 minutes. Each word drove the truth deeper, dismantling the narrative Wera had constructed to justify the most significant decision of her life. "She reported him missing immediately," Barbara continued, old pain evident in her voice. "The police investigation found nothing, no witnesses, no evidence, as if he had simply vanished. Katarzyna never recovered from the loss. She spent every resource searching for him until her death 10 years ago." "I didn't know," Wera whispered, the inadequacy of the words burning in her throat. "I thought he was abandoned. I had just received the news that I could never have children of my own. When I found him alone, it seemed like Providence." "Providence?" Barbara's voice hardened. "You destroyed my sister's life. She died still searching for her son, never knowing if he was alive or dead, suffering or safe." The accusation landed with crushing force. Wera had never considered herself a villain in her own story, ambitious and ruthless in business, certainly, but justified in the one truly selfish act she had committed outside the corporate arena. Now she saw her actions through Barbara's eyes, not as a rescue but as a theft, not as love but as supreme selfishness. "Why haven't you told Thomas?" Wera asked finally. "You've clearly had opportunities since he returned to Poland." Barbara's expression softened slightly, complexity replacing the earlier anger. "I've asked myself that question every day since I recognized him. The resemblance to Katarzyna is unmistakable once you're looking for it. But he has built an identity, a life, learning that everything he believes about himself is a lie." She shook her head. "I wanted to be certain before upending his world." "And now?" Wera asked, already knowing the answer. "Now he's ill with symptoms that might have genetic components," Barbara replied grimly. "His doctors need his true medical history, something you can't provide." The silent accusation hung between them. If Thomas died because of missing medical information, the responsibility would fall squarely on Wera's shoulders. "I understand," Wera said quietly. "I'll tell him everything when he wakes." Barbara studied her intently. "You really do love him." It wasn't a question, but Wera answered anyway. "More than anything, more than power or money or freedom. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth." Before Barbara could respond, a nurse appeared at the door. "Ms. Lewandowska, Mr. Wisniewski is awake and asking for you." Her gaze shifted to Wera. "Both of you, actually. He seems quite insistent." The women exchanged a glance, loaded with unresolved tension, then followed the nurse back to Thomas's room. He was sitting up in bed, color returning to his face, an IV still attached to his arm, but his expression alert. "Barbara," he greeted with obvious relief, then turned to Wera with equal warmth. "And Wera, thank you both for coming." The simple gratitude threatened to unravel Wera's composure entirely. She had expected anger, confusion, hurt, not this genuine welcome that made her deception feel all the more monstrous. "How are you feeling?" Barbara asked, moving to his bedside. "Better. The doctors are baffled. They're running more tests, but the symptoms have subsided considerably." He smiled ruefully. "Probably just exhaustion and poor nutrition. I've been rather single-minded about the Porto Azul fight." "Thomas," Wera began, her voice unsteady. "There's something I need to tell you." He raised a hand to stop her. "Before either of you says anything more, I should confess something. I haven't been entirely honest with either of you." The unexpected statement caught both women off guard. Thomas looked between them with an expression that combined apology, determination, and an oddly youthful anxiety. "I knew who you were the moment I saw you in that cafe, Wera, or should I say, Mother?" The word hung in the hospital room like a physical presence, causing Wera to reach for the wall to steady herself. Barbara inhaled sharply but remained silent. "How?" Wera managed. "I've changed so much, my appearance, my name." "But not your eyes," Thomas said simply. "Or the way you tilt your head when you're considering a difficult question. Or a dozen other small habits that survive any cosmetic alteration. I knew you immediately." "Why didn't you say anything?" The question escaped as barely more than a whisper. Thomas's expression held a lifetime of complexity. "I wanted to understand why you had left, why you had changed your identity, whether you still cared at all, and most importantly, whether the rumors connecting Wera Kaczmarek to my mother were true or merely my desperate imagination." "What rumors?" Barbara interjected sharply. 2 years ago I came across an old business journal article about Meridian's mysterious CEO, with her guarded private life and sudden appearance in the corporate world. There was a photo, heavily edited, but something in it triggered my memories. He turned to Wera. "I've been tracking your career ever since, trying to understand how the mother who taught me to protect nature became the corporate developer destroying it." The irony of their parallel investigations struck Wera with painful clarity. While she had monitored his life from a distance, he had been studying hers with equal determination. "When I learned Meridian was behind the Porto Azul development, I requested the assignment specifically," Thomas continued. "I needed to confront you to understand, but when you actually appeared in Gdynia, calling yourself Wera Novak again, I couldn't just demand answers. I needed to know who you had become." The role reversal left Wera speechless. She had approached their reunion with such careful calculation, never imagining that Thomas had orchestrated his own investigative agenda. "There's more you need to know," Barbara said, stepping forward. "About your birth family." Thomas's expression shifted to one of confusion. "My birth family? What are you talking about?" Barbara glanced at Wera, a silent question in her eyes. Wera nodded slowly. The truth had remained hidden for too long already. "Thomas," Barbara said gently, "I'm your aunt. Your mother, your birth mother, was my sister, Katarzyna. You weren't abandoned at that construction site. She had left you briefly while seeking medical attention for an injury, intending to return immediately." Thomas's face drained of color. His gaze darted between the two women, disbelief battling with a dawning comprehension. "That's not possible. My mother—" He gestured toward Wera. "She adopted me. She told me my parents had died." "I told you what I believed would cause the least pain," Wera admitted, each word feeling like broken glass in her throat. "And what would protect us both from the consequences of what I had done." "Which was what exactly?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. The moment Wera had feared for 20 years had arrived. There was nowhere left to hide, no justification that could soften the blow of her confession. "I took you," she said simply. "I had just learned I couldn't have children of my own. When I found you alone at the construction site, I convinced myself you had been abandoned. I created new identities for both of us and left my old life behind to raise you as my son." She watched the impact of her words ripple across his face. Shock, disbelief, betrayal, anger, each emotion cutting her more deeply than any boardroom defeat ever had. "You kidnapped me?" The raw hurt in his voice was unbearable. "Yes," Wera admitted. No excuses, no mitigation. The stark truth laid bare. Thomas turned to Barbara, desperate for confirmation or denial. "And my real mother, your sister, she was looking for me all this time." Barbara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Until the day she died 10 years ago. She never gave up hope of finding you." The revelation seemed to physically strike Thomas. He closed his eyes, his breathing unsteady. When he opened them again, his gaze fixed on Wera with an intensity that seemed to peer into her very soul. All those years in Gdynia, living as mother and son, that was, what, an elaborate lie? "The circumstances were a lie," Wera acknowledged, "but not my love for you. Never that." "Love?" The word emerged as a bitter laugh. "You stole me from my family, let my birth mother die without knowing what happened to her child, abandoned me at boarding school when I became inconvenient, and then reappeared in my life under false pretenses. That's not love. It's pathological. Selfishness. Each accusation landed with devastating accuracy. Wera made no attempt to defend herself. Barbara intervened, her tone gentler than Wera had expected. Thomas, the doctors need to know your family medical history. Your mother, Katarzyna, had a rare genetic condition that caused episodes similar to what you experienced today. It's treatable if diagnosed properly. Is that why you collapsed? Wera asked, maternal concern overriding everything else. The doctor mentioned unusual blood chemistry. Thomas seemed momentarily disoriented by the shift to medical concerns. Yes, they're still running tests. I've had episodes before, dizziness, rapid heartbeat, confusion, nothing this serious until now. Congenital long QT syndrome, Barbara supplied. It runs in our family. Katarzyna managed it with medication. Her entire life. I'll speak with your doctors immediately. As Barbara hurried from the room to find the medical team, an uncomfortable silence descended between Wera and Thomas. 20 years of secrets, lies, and unspoken truths hung in the air between them. I don't know what to call you anymore, Thomas finally said, his voice oddly detached. You're not my mother. You're not really Wera Novak. And Wera Kaczmarek is a corporate persona you created. I'm all of those women, she replied quietly. The one who raised you, the one who left you, and the one who built an empire to fill the void you left behind. None of them are complete without the others. Thomas studied her with the analytical gaze she recognized from his childhood, the look that had always preceded his most penetrating questions. Why did you really send me away to boarding school? Was it because someone might have recognized you? Partly, she admitted. I was reclaiming my corporate identity, though under her new name. The risk of exposure increased, but mostly, she hesitated, then committed to complete honesty. I was reverting to the person I had been before you, ambitious, driven by power and validation. I told myself you would have better opportunities abroad, but the truth is, I was choosing my career over our family. At least that part is consistent with who you've become, Thomas said bitterly. The great Wera Kaczmarek, putting profit above everything else, even her own son. The assessment stung precisely because it reflected how Wera had viewed herself until recent days. That was true, she acknowledged. Until I saw you again in that ballroom, until I realized what I had sacrificed for success that suddenly meant nothing. Before Thomas could respond, Barbara returned with Dr. Adamski. The conversation necessarily shifted to medical matters, family history, treatment options, prognosis. The genetic condition was indeed the likely cause of Thomas's collapse, and with proper medication, he could expect to manage it successfully. When the doctor left, Barbara approached Thomas's bedside. I should have told you sooner about your mother, about Katarzyna. I've known who you were since you joined the Environmental Coalition, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter your world without absolute certainty. And now, Thomas asked, exhaustion evident in his voice. Now you need rest, Barbara replied firmly. The revelations and decisions can wait until you're stronger. She's right, Wera agreed. We'll both be here when you're ready to talk further. Thomas's expression hardened. Will you? Or will you disappear again when things become difficult? It seems to be your pattern. The accusation landed with painful accuracy. Wera had no defense to offer, only a promise she knew carried little weight given her history. I won't leave. Not this time. As Barbara prepared to stay the night in the hospital room, Wera reluctantly withdrew, understanding that her presence caused Thomas more distress than comfort. In the stark hospital corridor, she felt the full weight of her actions cascading through time. The impulsive decision 20 years ago that had altered so many lives, the self-serving choices that had compounded the original transgression, and the truth that now threatened to destroy the one relationship she valued above all others. Outside the hospital, Wera stood in the cool night air, watching the lights of Gdynia harbor in the distance. Her phone buzzed persistently with messages from Meridian, board members demanding updates, Marek making thinly veiled threats, executives seeking direction on the Porto Azul modifications. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The corporate empire she had built felt suddenly hollow, a poor substitute for what she had sacrificed. With sudden clarity, Wera knew what she needed to do. The path forward would cost her everything she had built, but perhaps if fate or the sea goddess or whatever forces governed such matters were merciful, it might offer the possibility of redemption. Not forgiveness, she had no right to expect. That, but perhaps a chance to make partial amends for 20 years of cascading wrongs. As dawn broke over Gdynia harbor, Wera Kaczmarek began drafting the documents that would dismantle her carefully constructed life. Wera's trembling fingers hovered over the keyboard as dawn's pale light spilled through her window. In that quiet moment, she understood that the documents she was drafting weren't merely corporate memos or legal filings. They were a declaration of the end of a double life. They would sever the malignant ties of deception, exposing the truth about Meridian's compromise practices and her own personal transgressions. With each keystroke, she felt both the crushing weight of regret and a spark of hope that perhaps, somehow she could begin to atone. Her mind drifted back to all the years when ambition had blinded her to the quiet needs of a child, and to the moment when her carefully orchestrated plan to protect Thomas had unraveled under the relentless force of truth. Now, as she wrote, she resolved to embrace honesty regardless of the price. There was a strange freedom in facing the consequences head-on, even if it meant dismantling everything she had built. Over the next several hours, Wera composed a series of memos and internal reports that laid bare the environmental irregularities at the Porto Azul project. Every statement was supported by the evidence she had collected, evidence that would not only stall the project indefinitely, but also force a full, transparent review of Meridian's past decisions. She sent encrypted messages to trusted board members who had remained loyal, and to a select group of environmental regulators, hoping that by doing so she might begin to restore some semblance of integrity to both her company and her conscience. As she pressed send on the final email, her thoughts returned to Thomas. His parting words in the hospital, his wary promise that she would not disappear when things became difficult, echoed in her mind. She recalled the shock and hurt in his eyes when he learned the truth, a look that now burned with both anger and a tentative longing for reconciliation. Wera knew that if she truly cared for him, she must meet him in person and offer a complete, unvarnished apology. The documents, she decided, were only the first step in a much longer journey toward making amends. Later that morning, as she prepared to leave her modest rented apartment in Gdynia, Wera made a silent vow. No longer would she hide behind a corporate persona or allow her past to dictate her future. She gathered a small duffel bag, filled with a few essential personal items and a handwritten letter meant for Thomas, a letter in which she poured out her remorse, her truth, and her desperate wish to be accepted as the mother he needed. Every word was heavy with the weight of 20 years, yet it carried an earnest plea for forgiveness and understanding. On a brisk walk toward the hospital, Wera passed the familiar landmarks of Gdynia, a place where memories clung to every weathered bench and faded mural. She recalled how years ago she had once felt the same coastal air with hope and joy, only to have ambition and secrecy cloud her vision. Today, each step felt like a rebirth, a final farewell to the life of ruthless ambition that had defined her for so long. At the hospital entrance, she paused to compose herself before meeting Barbara, who had become an unexpected ally despite their tumultuous history. Barbara greeted her with a measured nod. "I understand you have something important to share with Thomas," she said softly. Her tone carried both professional concern and personal empathy, a recognition of the tangled history between them all. Wera nodded, and the two women moved through the hushed corridors until they reached Thomas's room. The familiar beeping of monitors provided a steady backdrop to the heavy silence that filled the space. Thomas sat upright in bed, his eyes cautious and searching as he noticed Wera approach. The sight of her, a woman both familiar and unrecognizable, stirred a whirlwind of emotions within him. "Thomas," she began, her voice wavering slightly as she unfolded the letter from her hand. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to understand. I was lost. I made choices that were driven by fear and ambition, and I betrayed you in ways that I can't undo. But every day since I saw you again, I have regretted every moment of that deception." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she continued, "I thought I was protecting you by removing myself from your life, but I realize now that I was protecting only myself, from facing the pain of my own decisions. I understand if you hate me, Thomas. I can't imagine how hurt you must feel. All I ask is that you let me explain, and maybe in time, allow me to make things right." For several long moments, the only sound was the quiet hum of the hospital machines and the measured rhythm of Thomas's breathing. Finally he spoke, his voice low and guarded. "I knew there was something off about everything. All these years I felt abandoned, like I was being kept away for a reason. I followed your trail, trying to piece together the truth. And now, hearing you say this, it hurts, Mom, it hurts so much." Wera's heart broke with each syllable, and she felt the sting of every lost moment, every silent goodbye that had haunted Thomas since his childhood. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her tone barely audible. "I was so consumed by my own need to belong, to prove something, that I lost sight of what mattered, your life, your well-being. I understand if you can't forgive me now or ever. I only hope that someday you'll see that my love for you was real, even if my actions were misguided." Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he listened. The room seemed to shrink around them, charged with the raw, unfiltered emotion of a reunion that was as painful as it was necessary. "I always wanted to know who I was," he said, his voice trembling. "All my life I've had questions, doubts, and then I found clues that pointed to you, that said you were more than just a shadow in my past. I needed to know. I needed to understand why you did it." Barbara stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Thomas, I know this is overwhelming. The truth is messy, and sometimes the choices made in desperation leave scars that never fully heal. But you deserve to know who you are, and that means knowing all parts of your story, the ones that hurt and the ones that brought you joy." Thomas stared at his mother, absorbing her words like bitter medicine. "I'm angry, Mom," he finally admitted. "Angry that I was stolen from my real family. I'm angry that you disappeared when I needed you most. And now I don't know who to trust, who to believe when everything is tangled up in lies." Wera reached out a tentative hand, which Thomas hesitated before accepting. "I can't undo what's been done," she said softly, "but I want to be here now. I want to help you with your treatment, and I want to be honest with you, every step of the way, even if it means facing the consequences of my past." A long silence passed as Thomas considered her words. The pain in his eyes was deep, but beneath it there was a glimmer of cautious hope, a possibility that his life could still be reclaimed from the wreckage of old secrets. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to process, to understand everything that's happened, and I need you to leave me space when I ask for it." Wera nodded, swallowing back the flood of remorse. "I promise, Thomas. I'll give you all the time you need. I'm here to support you, not to force you to forgive me immediately." Outside Thomas's room, Barbara and Wera stood in quiet companionship. The corridors of the hospital, usually echoing with the sterile sounds of commerce and efficiency, now bore witness to the fragile rebirth of a relationship long buried under layers of guilt and ambition. Barbara's earlier sternness softened as she regarded Wera. "You have a long road ahead," she said gently, "but if you're sincere, you might just have a chance to rebuild what was lost." Wera's eyes met hers, filled with both resolve and vulnerability. "I know," she replied. "I have to dismantle everything I've built on lies, starting with my own identity. I'm willing to face the consequences, however painful they may be, if it means I can finally be honest with Thomas and with myself." In the days that followed, as Thomas underwent further tests and began treatment for his congenital condition, Wera withdrew from the public eye. She stepped away from her role as Meridian's formidable CEO, handing over the reins of her corporate empire to a trusted interim leader. The boardroom battles and power plays were replaced by long, solitary nights of reflection. In each quiet moment, she pored over old photographs, letters, and records of a past that no longer existed, a past that she now needed to atone for. Gradually, Thomas began to accept visits from his mother, each encounter measured and laden, with the honest, unguarded conversation that had been missing for so long. Their meetings were tentative at first, a walk along the quiet Gdynia harbour, a shared cup of coffee at a modest cafe, and over time the space between them shrank as understanding slowly replaced anger. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Thomas's condition stabilized and the legal and corporate repercussions of Meridian's environmental misdeeds came under investigation, he and Wera sat together on a bench overlooking the sea. The waves lapped gently at the shore, echoing the rhythms of renewal and regret. "Do you think," Thomas began hesitantly, "that someday I might be able to forgive you?" His voice was soft, uncertain, a question that carried all the weight of years lost. Wera took his hand, her own trembling with the enormity of the moment. "I don't expect forgiveness to come quickly," she replied. "I know I've done things that can never be undone, but I hope that in time my actions from now on can speak louder than the mistakes of the past. I want to be here for you, truly, present without secrets or lies." The sea breeze carried a promise, however fragile, of new beginnings. In that quiet moment, amid the muted hum of life continuing around them, both mother and son understood that the journey to healing would be long and fraught with difficult truths. Yet, there was a shared determination to move forward, a commitment to build something genuine from the ruins of deception. As dusk settled over Gdynia, the lights of the harbour twinkled like distant beacons of hope. Wera Kaczmarek, no longer the impenetrable corporate titan, but a woman laid bare by her own conscience, sat with Thomas, and for the first time in decades allowed the possibility of redemption to take root in the warmth of shared vulnerability. And though the scars of the past would forever remain, there was now the promise that love, however imperfect, might eventually bridge the chasm of betrayal and loss. In that promise lay the seeds of a future where truth and reconciliation, no matter how painfully harvested, could one day give way to a life defined not by power and profit, but by the courage to embrace one's true self and the unyielding strength of forgiveness. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel,